The other important issue was that the call for the shutdown was actually coming from the opposition, which is an important thing considering the fact that it somehow united the public.
Dear friends, we are here for another part of the Forum 2000 chat series online with a range of interesting guests. And my name is Jan Schneidauf. This is my first time and I'll be accompanying you. I'm working here at the Foreign Ministry. But most importantly, the guest today is Mrs. Tinatin Khidasheli. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, otherwise she will correct me. Who is a political scientist as well as a lawyer, and pretty much with distinguished studies and professional background, inter alia, and quite notably she was a defense minister in one of the Georgian governments over the past years, and I think the first female defense minister. But she's been doing actually a lot of things, focusing on anti-corruption issues, on transatlantic cooperation, European things, but also women policies, women in public life. And currently, I believe she's the leader of Civic IDEA, which is a civil society organization engaged in a range of democracy-related things, including an online framework called Democracy Academy. So that was very short, the background of our guest today, and we will of course focus on situation in Georgia, in the region, and more broadly with relation to the pandemic and to what it has meant for the world and what is there for the future. Thank you. So here we are once again. I hope I didn't mess it up with your introduction.
No.
Let me simply kick off. If we for the beginning stay with Georgia as a country, it seems to me the situation is not pretty bad, or isn't, and probably is not going to be. Looking at the statistics, it seems you have less than 20 dead with COVID, less than 1,000 cases. It's pretty good in comparison to many countries, including some very advanced industrialized countries, what have you. So speaking about the situation, what is the outlook for the near future? I think you are already easing up the lockdown. Restaurants are going to open and so on. So is actually Georgian society going back to normal? Is it that?
Yeah, first of all, hello. Hello to everybody who is watching this very interesting series of webinars by Forum 2000. And thank you for having me among very important and distinguished speakers you've already hosted, and I believe you will host in the future as well. Georgia has done a pretty good job, I should say, due to several reasons. Your statistic is correct. We have only 12 deaths and a little bit more than 700 cases, which is absolutely special compared to the rest of the region, not only to the rest of the world, but particularly in the region where we live in, and we are watching development of quite difficult processes. We've somehow managed to survive all the crises. Russia, Armenia particularly now is getting worse and worse. Turkey has quite high number of cases, Azerbaijan, and our statistics is as I've already said. There are several reasons for it. First of all, because we've started the whole shutdown procedure pretty early. I think we were one of the first countries, well, definitely we were one of the countries in a wider region, and not only in South Caucasus, but like in the wider region, including Central Asia and Russia, obviously, and South Ukraine, who closed the airspace to international traffic. And also somehow for some very strange and ununderstandable reason, our health sector was extremely well organized. Strange because nothing is well organized in Georgia, but as soon as we approached the crisis, they demonstrated high professional spirit as well as high professionalism, high professional ethics also. And they proved to be not only good doctors, but also very good managers in the crisis situation. The other reason for it is that probably for the first time for this government that we have today since 2016, they've understood pretty quickly that they should have stepped aside. They understood that with all the failures they are famous for all these 4 years that they are in power, they understood that this was the moment when they should have given a chance to professionals to deal with the crisis. So basically for more than 2 months, we were only listening, seeing, watching, hearing the health professionals. Government was somehow absent. On the one hand, it's a tragedy, obviously, but in this case, it proved to be a right decision because the people who are efficient and professionals got in charge and they did their job. The other important issue was that the call for the shutdown was actually coming from the opposition, which is an important thing considering the fact that it somehow united the public. So it was not the government who shut the country and then everyone else was calling against it, but it was just the opposite. The opposition started call for the shutdown and then government followed this call. So somehow we've got this political elite was united in this purpose, different from everything else we fight and quarrel all the time. So that was basically the probably is the explanation of how we've managed to do more or less better than all the others in our region.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I think there are quite some lessons learned in that, and very interesting to hear that, you know, in a remote country in the Caucasus and so on, things can be handled pretty well. That was, of course, an exaggeration, but I'm sure that many people have a perception of Georgia like that, like they have a perception about Czechia, by the way. We had a similar thing here for some time. It was the professionals. It was a deputy minister who was an epidemiologist in charge of the response and so on. Worked out quite well for the time, I think, exactly. But in a way, right, politics was forcing itself on the scene, and less so domestic politics, because it for a moment really went into the background, but international politics. And quite early we started seeing various disinformation things coming from different sides, and we know the usual suspects. And was a lot of whitewashing of a big country's assistance, even though it was actually selling things rather than donating. And so it was a mask diplomacy, quite heavy enforced on us and from other directions as well. And we saw that the virus data can get easily manipulated. And I think you wrote about that yourself, that there was a lot, aimed against the democratic system, in a way promoting the authoritarian model. I think that was quite palpable in Georgia, wasn't it? And the question is, how much has it taken an impact on the democracy in Georgia, perhaps fragile democracy? How did it go?
Yeah. Well, 3 points probably. First of all, in terms of democratic institutions being ready or resilient to the crisis, as I've already mentioned, it was a smart decision on the government not to get in charge, but to put professionals in charge, because exactly of the reason that our institutions are not necessarily ready for dealing with the crisis. We saw it on several occasions. First of all, obviously, probably the worst experience that we have today after 3 months is the Parliament of Georgia, who decided simply to give up on all its powers and very simply, very irresponsibly put all the authority on the government. And it all was done against the constitutional provisions and constitutional demands in a country. Our constitution very clearly says that in times of crisis, being it state of emergency or state of war or whatever crises are developing, then there is a long list of pandemics and all kinds of like natural catastrophes, earthquakes, flood, and so on and so forth. The procedure as it goes by the constitution is that there is a state of emergency declared, and there should be special decrees by which you rule the country during the state of emergency. But parliament is in session non-stop. And it says very clear, the constitution says very clearly that parliament works on a daily basis without any termination to, first of all, make all the necessary decisions and adjust the conditions on a daily basis if there is a worsening or if there is easing of the situation. And on the other hand, also to control and keep government accountable, because this is exactly under the state of emergency. When things go different way than it is prescribed in all our transparency legislation that all democracies have. What our parliament did, contrary to the constitutional requirement, they've got together when the state of emergency was announced by the president next morning. They took a decision, they approved the state of emergency, they passed a decree in which they just wrote one sentence. They said, all the power goes to government, you do whatever you feel necessary, don't bother us, please, we are not to be in charge. And then they went
They were happy not to be responsible, huh?
I was even joking. We have a very good word in Georgia, kind of a mocking this absence leave. And they went in absence leave for a month, and then they've got together once again after a month when the next emergency extension should have been taken, and that was it. During the whole pandemic, we had only 2 sessions of parliament and no other notice of the parliamentary work.
Right.
So, the parliament. As for the government, we have obviously, as all the other countries do, a special instrument dealing with the emergencies. It's called the Security Council. That is the one responsible during the crisis. Now, for 3 months, there was no single gathering of the Security Council. I mean, zero, none. The leader has decided to manage the situation alone, single-handedly. And all we were seeing or we were hearing from was some emergency staff around the Prime Minister who was taking all the decisions. Completely unconstitutional, completely illegal. If tomorrow someone decides to challenge those in a court, we will be in a huge catastrophe, because every citizen of Georgia who will decide to go to the court to challenge, for example, closure of their businesses or whatever was followed will be shut.
So that was in a way a crisis of democracy, in fact, right? Is it what you are saying?
Collapse of the democratic institutions, it did not work. So that's one thing. The other, you mentioned disinformation. One of the reasons that I did not mention of our success was also the fact that we are hosting, we have a American-built, American gift Lugar laboratory, biochemical laboratory that goes by the name of the late Senator Richard Lugar, because he opened it in. This laboratory proved to be probably the best thing that ever happened with us, because the tests were extremely quick and also reliable, and the confidence that Georgians got during the pandemics, that there was no panic at all, was because of this laboratory. There was an instrument available in a country that was giving confidence to everybody that if something goes wrong, we knew that those guys would identify quickly, find quickly, and if the diagnosis were quick, then obviously we could have acted very quickly.
I see.
The laboratory was very instrumental, and obviously the whole disinformation campaign from Russia was about it. So basically, during the pandemic, the last one was actually on 26th of May, which is the Independence Day of Georgia. So for the whole these 3 months, including the last one on 26th of May, Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs was constantly making official announcements. Minister Lavrov himself made an announcement that Lugar laboratory was actually in charge of the virus spread in the region, and they manipulating the information and statistics in a way that, oh, look at Georgia, they have such a low numbers, and everybody else in the region has high numbers. Why is that happening? Because of the Lugar laboratory, that they are sort of spreading.
Right. My God, it sounds to me as if we should, or you should, be communicating the model and the laboratory in factual terms more broadly, so that we have the right counter stories, no, the real stories. But okay, we are now talking about.
Add to that one sentence. We've started a project together with another Czech organization, European Values. Probably you know them. And we are publishing a newsletter together with them twice a month. And actually, first two issues were in a big way devoted to this whole disinformation campaigns about the Lugar laboratory. So if anybody is interested, you can check and see all the information. Obviously, it's available online about it, what was actually going on and how the story was developing. It was so tragic that 26th of May is an Independence Day of Georgia. People were congratulating us, sending all the good wishes, and then suddenly we've got the statement by the Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs basically saying that they are terrorists because they sort of the terrorists because they are sending this deadly virus all over, and please respond. What's your plan, and how you what are you going to do about it?
Thank you for that, and let me pick it up from here. So we have already been talking about Russia. We know well the regional sensitivities of Georgia and Russia and the border. Russia's neighborhood is not particularly easy. We know that very well. So question number one, what has been your assessment of Russia's responses, Russia's behavior? You talked about Minister Lavrov's denouncement of the laboratory and so on. But is it the case that you have observed some sharpening of the Russian positions toward more aggressive positions or not? The flip side is perhaps, yes, we talked already about transatlantic, American, and so on. Where has been Europe in all this? I've read the statistics that the EU has provided some 150 million euros for fighting the disease and so on. So how significant was that in terms of disease response, but also in terms of the political picture in Georgia? Was it more fear from Russia, and Europe is sort of coming to help us and reassure us, or was the perception different?
Yeah, well, Russia never lets us forget them. So we are obviously witnessing waves. Sometimes it's on a high speed, sometimes on a low, but it's always there. So starting from the fact that obviously 20% of my country is occupied by Russia. We have two Russian military bases on the territory of Georgia. We have an air base on the territory of Georgia. We have their presence in Black Sea. On our side as well, not only on Crimea side, but also in Abkhazia, on the territory of Georgia. Another daily or weekly activity they are involved in normally in Georgia is that they are kidnapping people for ransom, ordinary peasants in most of the cases, just to keep reminding every day that they are in charge and they can do whatever they want, and as much they can damage and create dangerous situations as much as they want. We've been witnessing grabbing of more and more territories by Russia along the occupation line. Several villages were lost actually after 2008 war. So right now the occupation line is much wider inside the Georgia proper than it was drawn in 2008.
Okay.
And so we are witnessing building up of we call it a transparent Berlin Wall, because it's not made of a brick anymore, but it's a barbed wire by which they are creating those artificial boundaries between Ethiopia and rest of that region, as well as Abkhazia and Samegrelo on the side of the Georgia controlled territory. And during the pandemic, all that story was on. there was no week we did not hear the news of yet another crime committed by Russian militaries along the occupation line. When it goes to the disinformation campaigns, obviously, once again, and Lugar Laboratory is not an only a case and only theme they are concerned with. We have constant presence of the Russian disinformation materials in Georgian media and in the information space. And thirdly, cyber attacks. Cyber attacks have become kind of new normal for Georgia. Here they are twice, times, like 100 times, I don't know. Depends on the size, depends on the importance of the institution, but constantly it is happening. Since last October, particularly when there was a massive attack on Georgia and by completely independent investigations done by British, American, Dutch, Norwegian specialists, all of them proved that there was Russia's security forces involved, and there were even particular units identified from where that massive cyber security attack happened. Since October 2019, it's been always there. Smaller size, not significant. Some people don't even declare about it because you don't really feel what is happening on the health sector, getting the data. The very last one was on electoral databases. And probably, you know, we are facing, we have parliamentary elections in October this year. So it's a very troubling moment. We don't know what they are going to use it for.
Okay, I'm getting the picture. I'm just also getting signals we will need to be nearing the end. Maybe if you want to say a sentence or two or three about the European, if it played any role, the European domain aspect.
Obviously, as always, is extremely instrumental. They are instrumental and visible constantly. It's not just the humanitarian aid or financial aid that we are getting from Europe, but also the political support, huge political support that we are facing, we are seeing and witnessing every day. And this is probably much more important than the money that is coming from the European Union, because in these difficult times, feeling that you are not alone and hoping that someone is going to come to help you if things become worse, obviously is very important and very critical.
Right.
To the end, I want to add one sentence because we've talked about Lugar Laboratory. It will be only fair to mention that it's not just Russia who was attacking the Lugar Laboratory, but China also attacked Lugar Laboratory. And we had a wave of statements starting from the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs about the American laboratories outside the United States being in charge of spread of virus. Yes, they did not name Georgia by name, but as we are one of the hosts of that institution, it meant Georgia as well.
So you are the anonymous American agent in Eastern Europe, right? But I think we have a minute or two to conclude. So in a few sentences only, do you think this whole crisis is going to have a very long-term impact, or are we simply going back to normal? Or are there any apocalyptic visions, or on the other side, some new opportunities? What's your view of that? Are we going in a very bad direction, or there is a promising one?
I'm a very optimistic person generally, and I'm trying to look at even most dramatic things from that optimist lens. And I do see a huge potential of a positive developments coming out of this crisis. Obviously, we first need to come out of the crisis, but after that, I believe that we hit the wall which looked like difficult to move. There is a wall of digitalization, right? In most of those countries where the state is not rich enough, where people are not rich enough, and the digital world was not necessarily their first priority, because if you have high poverty, if you have high unemployment, obviously there are other things occupying your mind. Now, pandemic showed, and also killed all the mythology around regardless of all the 5G mythology that is developing in the world. Still, we are in the momentum when I think all of us need to use this opportunity for getting more advanced, to get more creative, to get more technologically, not to be technologically challenged anymore. That was the problem of the, I would say, most parts of the world before pandemic. Just one example, for example, in Georgia, I know it's not the same for the most parts of Europe, but in Georgia, having online classes is kind of illegal. Oh. Because our law is very positivistic. So whatever is not written in a law is not allowed in certain fields. So if there is a definition, what constitutes education, and right. If the course are not included there, it means that it does not constitute the education. It's kind of funny. It's like a joke in 21st century, in 2020. But now, without any support from the legislation, that's what we do every day. After this interview, I have yet another class on a Zoom, obviously. It's just one example, but it shows that people start to understand that there is a completely different world out there in the clouds, basically, and you need to adjust to that world. Otherwise, right. You have the success. So I think that's one of the stories we need to remember from pandemic, and one of the successes we need to develop on to become technologically more advanced societies than we were before.
Very well, and I think that's a great concluding word that in some ways we are actually thankfully moving ahead with this crisis and learning to face the challenges in new ways. Tina Khidasheli, let me thank you very much for this inspiring interview, and I'm very sure that Forum 2000 and all of us here will be very happy to continue working with you for the future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for this opportunity, and I hope to see you in October in Prague, in person, and to have 1,000 live again, not just online.
Yes, let's hope for that. Thank you. Bye-bye. It was a pleasure.